If you don't know about the Lucy Letby case, she is on trial for 7 counts of murder and 10 counts of attempting to murder babies. I've already uploaded 2 videos and I suggest you watch them. A Lucy Letby pre-trial video and a video highlighting each charge. She's pled not guilty, and here we respect innocent until proven guilty. The usual disclaimer goes out. This is a real true crime case. It involves real people. Those real people have real families. So although I do want you to comment and share, please do so with sensitivity. Day 1, Monday the 10th of October 2022. The prosecution opens their case. At Manchester Crown Court, Lucy Letby was sat in the glass in case dock as the prosecution opened and outlined its case. To start with, the prosecution talked about the Countess of Chester Hospital. They told the court it was a busy general hospital with a neonatal unit that cared for premature and sick babies. They explained that up until January 2015, the mortality rate of the unit was comparable with other hospitals, but in the 18 months after, there was a significant rise in the number of babies who were dying or having serious collapses. The prosecution told the court the consultants at the Countess of Chester Hospital searched for a cause, but they couldn't find one. Then the consultants noticed all the unexplained collapses and deaths had one common denominator. They went on to say that common denominator was Lucy Letby. The prosecution called Lucy a constant malevolent presence when things took a turn for the worse. The court was told during that time the Countess of Chester's neonatal unit had between 25 and 30 nurses, as well as about 15 nursery nurses. They also pointed out that the neonatal unit isn't an open unit, and access to it is closely restricted. They put out that many of the cases initially occurred during night shifts, until Lucy Letby moved from night shifts onto day shifts, and it was then that the collapses and deaths also moved to the daytime. The prosecution told the court that sometimes babies were injected with air, and on other occasions they were fed insulin or too much milk, and that Lucy had tried to murder some of the babies more than once. They stated that Lucy was trained to care for the most seriously ill babies, and she developed an unusual interest in the parents of some of her alleged victims, and tracked them on Facebook. The prosecution then took the jury through the outlining circumstance of each count. Again, if you haven't seen the circumstances video or suggest you do. Day 2, Tuesday the 11th of October 2022. The prosecution continues to open their case. We don't really need to go into much detail here. The prosecution continued to talk about the circumstances of each count. They also talked more specifically about the times Lucy had Facebooked the parents of her alleged victims, as well as messages between Lucy and her colleagues. But we'll get to that stuff in more detail during the depths of the trial. Day 3, Wednesday the 12th of October 2022. The prosecution continues to open their case. Again, we don't really need to go into much detail. The prosecution continued to talk about the circumstances of each count. Day 4, Thursday the 13th of October 2022. It was day 4 that really started to grab headlines. The day started off with the prosecution still highlighting the circumstances surrounding each count. However, it was this day that the prosecution started to show their evidence. And by evidence I mean some of the stuff that they'd found while searching Lucy's home. Even more specifically I mean notes that Lucy Letby had wrote on post-it notes. They included phrases such as, what allegations have been made and by who? Do they have written evidence to support their comments? I'm evil. I killed them on purpose because I'm not good enough. I'm a horrible evil person. It was also on the 4th day that the defence was opened, and the defence wasted no time dispelling the notes. They told the court that the notes were written in anguish, not guilt, and pointed out that the notes that Lucy had written also said things that suggest her innocence, adding that at the time the note was written Lucy was dealing with employment issues, including a grievance procedure. Lucy's defence declared Lucy Letby is adamant that she has not harmed any children. The defence also talked about each baby death. They stated in some cases the hospital was well out of its depth. They even went to the extent of showing the court a chart which had already been shown by the prosecution. The chart showed that Lucy Letby was present at 22 incidents, involving the 17 babies mentioned in the indictment. But Lucy's defence pointed out the chart was misleading. The chart showed the incidents that Lucy was there for, but it didn't show the shortcomings in care, which may be the fault of others, nor did it show any other incidents which took place when Lucy wasn't there. The defence instructed the jury to listen for any evidence that shows the unit at the Countess of Chester Hospital was understaffed and overstretched. They laid on heavy, telling the jury to be wary of confirmation bias, in which the experts may be influenced by the prosecution's theory, adding that the experts met as a group and considered their opinions jointly. They also metaphorically shined a light on Lucy, describing her as a young nurse with no immediate family commitments, and someone who had built her life around the neonatal unit, and therefore was willing to be called in at short notice, stating someone in that position, in that role, is more likely to be there when deterioration happens. But that doesn't mean she made it happen. They also pointed out that although the prosecution consistently highlighted how some babies recovered after they were moved away from Lucy, the prosecution failed to point out that it's also true that the babies recovered after being moved away from the Countess of Chester Hospital, claiming the hospital had a lack of technical medical skills, except to babies with too high a level of care need, and on occasion was too busy. The defence pointed to the fact that the hospital was downgraded by a clinical watchdog and redesignated to a level 1, adding the hospital could not provide care at the level it did. Lucy's defence said that although the evidence may look daunting to start with, they asked them to consider 5 things throughout the trial. 1. The condition of the baby in question. 2. Any problems with the baby's health or the care leading up to the alleged charge. 3. Whether the prosecution's expert medical evidence proved there was deliberate harm done. 4. Whether Lucy Letby was present at the time, and if she was, what can the evidence establish about what she was doing. 5. If there were failings in care of the babies, or with the unit as a whole. Just like the prosecution, the defence went through each count. But this time, they were picking the charges to pieces. They were claiming the prosecution had no evidence that Lucy was to blame, and that the hospital in general was to blame. Week 2, Day 5. Monday the 17th of October 2022. On Monday the 17th of October, the court heard about the murder charge of Child A and the attempted murder charge of his twin, Child B. They also heard witness statements from their mum and dad. Child A was the first alleged murder victim. He, at just 1 day old on the 8th of June 2015, was the twin of Child B. It's the prosecution's case that Lucy injected Child A with an excess amount of air into her bloodstream and then attempted to murder his sister, Child B, via the same method the day after. The parents described how they'd been told they need to come quick, and when they got to the neonatal unit, it felt like there were hundreds of people standing around the incubator trying to resuscitate him. Despite doctors' efforts, the 1-day-old boy couldn't be saved. A long fight did ensue though, until the mum eventually gave the signal. The fight for Child A's life had been lost. Lucy Letby was on duty that night. In fact, she'd only been on shift for 1 hour, and the following night she was on duty again. And that's when Child B collapsed. Following a very similar situation to Child A, Child B had a rapid fall in heart rate and oxygen levels. But hospital staff managed to stabilise Child B. As with her twin brother, Child B's skin was discoloured and mottled, which a consultant said they'd never seen before. Child B was discharged in July 2015. And doesn't appear to have suffered any adverse consequences from her collapse. The twins' mother had previously been diagnosed with a rare blood disorder and was due to have an elective caesarean section in London under the care of a specialist. But the week before, she required an emergency caesarean section, following a diagnosis of preeclampsia. Day 6, Tuesday the 18th of October 2022. The jury was shown a series of messages that Lucy Letby exchanged with other staff members, as well as activity on her social media accounts. Less than 2 hours after she finished the shift in which Child had died, Lucy made a Facebook search for the twins' mum. The court was also told that on the 9th of June, before her shift started the day after Child A's death, she received a message from a nurse asking if she was okay. Lucy told her that she thought, "We all did everything we possibly could under very difficult and sad circumstances. Haven't had much sleep. Don't really want to see parents, but it's got to be done. I said to another nurse that I can't look after Child B because I just don't know how I'm going to feel seeing parents." Dad was on the floor crying, saying please don't take our baby away when we took him to the mortuary. It's just heartbreaking. It's the hardest thing I've ever had to do. Hopefully I have a more positive one tonight. They responded, saying Lucy should care for Child B, so the parents don't have a totally new face. There's a ton of messages from colleagues. I think it was on a group chat. Either way, they were all consoling her, telling her she did a great job, and other messages just generally being supportive. The jury heard that hours later, during Lucy's shift, Child B collapsed. As we've just mentioned, Child B did stabilise, and was eventually discharged the following month. At the start of that shift at 8 PM, Lucy had texted a colleague. Just a big shock for us all. Hard coming in tonight and seeing the parents. It's worth noting here, and it comes up a few times in her messages, that on the night Child had died, Lucy wasn't supposed to be working. She'd swapped shifts with another nurse as a favour to them. After Child A's death, Lucy took pictures, handprints, footprints and some of the baby's hair, as requested by Child A's parents, for a memory box. On the 25th of June, 2.5 weeks after Child A's death, Lucy made a third Facebook search for the twins' mum. The court heard how by the 30th of June nurses at the hospital began discussing the oddness of baby A's death, along with the deaths of 2 other babies the same month. Baby C on the 14th of June and baby D on the 22nd of June. One colleague told Lucy there's something odd about that night, and the other 3 that went so suddenly. Lucy asked, "What do you mean?" Or that we lost 3 and in different circumstances. The colleague replied, "Ignore me, I'm speculating." Lucy replied again saying, well, Child C was tiny, obviously compromised in utero. Child B septic. It's Child I can't get my head round. A staff debrief into the death of Child that was held on the 30th of July. Then, 3 months after Child A's death, on the 9th of September, Lucy searched for Child A and Child B's mum on Facebook. Again, that's the 4th time. 10 days later, she messaged a colleague to ask about the twins' parents. They responded saying they seemed good, and the baby's father was loving having Child B home. Lucy replied saying, "That's great. She looks like her mum." Day 7, Wednesday the 19th of October 2022. Jurors were shown more messages Lucy Letby had exchanged with other staff members. One was sent just weeks after the alleged murders of Child A, Child C and Child D, and of course the attempted murder of Child B. Lucy sent, "Ho ho, nodding off in cinema isn't a good look. I had a mini meltdown last night about what's happened at work. I just need some time off with mum and dad." The jury will later read statements and heard evidence from the medical staff who cared for Child A and Child B. Dr. Sally Ogden was a registrar on duty on the day of Child A's death. She said she didn't remember anything out of the ordinary with Child A and Child B, and that she was shocked the next day when she found out Child A had died. Nurse Taylor started her shift at 7:30 in the morning on the day Child A died. She recalled he was a premature baby on respiratory support, which was expected, but he was stable and she had no concerns. Nurse Taylor handed over to Lucy that evening, and she recalled how Child A's health began to deteriorate at about 8 o'clock that evening. She explained that she was adding notes to a computer on the intensive care unit when Child A began falling ill. Lucy Letby was standing by the incubator. Nurse Taylor said she stayed at the computer, but then she realised Child A was not recovering from deterioration, so she got up to help. She added that she thought he was going to recover quite quickly because such desaturations weren't that uncommon, but he didn't. She explained that she wasn't directly involved with the resuscitation. She was drawing up the emergency drugs for someone to administer. The court heard that on the 10th of June, while Child B was still recovering, Lucy messaged a colleague asking to be kept up to date. They sent a message later on, saying there had been no change in baby B's condition. Lucy asked again at 8 minutes past 10 at night, and her colleague replied to say Child B was looking really good. Thursday the 20th of October 2022. The witness statements regarding Child A's death continued. The jury heard that Child A couldn't be given fluids for at least 4 hours, between 4 o'clock in the afternoon and 8 o'clock that night, and that was on the day he died. There had also been difficulty fitting an umbilical venous catheter, or a UVC for short. A UVC allows fluids and medicines to be given without frequently replacing an intravenous line. Dr. Harkness said the abnormal patches were all over Child A's body, and he had only ever seen it in one other child, but the defence even questioned that. They took the jury through Dr. Harkness' medical notes from that time, in which there was no reference to the abnormal blue, purple, red and white patches. The defence pressed on that why it had been omitted, and Dr. Harkness said it was an emotional time. It was one of the first neonatal deaths that he had experienced, and he had found it greatly upsetting. A note shown to the court from Nurse Taylor stated, "UVC in wrong position, reinserted. Again in wrong position, cannula tissued. Doctors busy on ward. Aware no fluids running for a couple of hours." When asked by Lucy's defence, Nurse Taylor confirmed Child A should have been getting fluids during that 4-hour period. Day 9, Friday the 21st of October 2022. Another nurse, who can't be identified, was a witness. At the start of her evidence, the nurse was asked how baby had looked as he went into a rapid collapse. She said, "I've never seen a baby look that way before. He looked very ill. He had a discoloration pattern I've never seen before. He was white with sort of purply blotches. He looked cyanotic. It was these purple blotches with white that I'd not seen before, all over his body." Asked where in particular on his body, she replied, "Everywhere. Maybe more torso. No, I can't remember clearly. I just knew it was very unusual. It had come on very suddenly. It was just so unusual." It wasn't long before it was Dr. Owen Arthur's turn on the stand. He's a professor of radiology at London's Great Ormond Street Hospital. He'd been instructed to review x-rays taken of Child A from alive and after death. He'd also been asked to do the same of similar for other babies in the investigation, looking at one of Child A's post-mortem x-rays. He highlighted to the court that there was gas within the bowel, which he said was normal, and also the heart. The prosecution asked if there was anything unusual about the x-ray. He pointed out a line of gas just in front of the spine, saying it wouldn't be there in death by natural causes. It had been documented in cases of road traffic accidents and sepsis infection, saying, "In my opinion, this was an unusual appearance, in the absence of any other explanation. This appearance is consistent with, but not diagnostic of, air having been administered," although he did admit that he couldn't say from the image alone that an air embolism, which is a gas bubble that enters a blood vessel, was the cause of Child A's death. Earlier on in the shift which Child had died, a cannula to a blood vessel had stopped working, followed by 2 failed attempts to correctly insert a catheter in the baby's belly button. Dr. Arthurs told the court it was possible that gas could have been introduced by one of those devices. When asked by the prosecution if he'd ever seen that much air in a baby without an explanation, He said no, going on to confirm the only other time he'd seen it was with another baby, a baby who was involved in this case. He said he'd based his opinion on a published peer-reviewed study from 2015, which looked at how common it is that gas occurs in older children who have died. However, very few babies were included in the study. He went on to review the deaths of 500 infants at Great Ormond Street. He also reviewed the x-rays of child B. And he said he found no significant abnormalities on her radiographic images, including on an x-ray taken 40 minutes after she suffered the sudden collapse. Dr. Offers carried out a large-scale review of past cases at Great Ormond Street to find possible explanations. He found such accumulations of trapped air could be found in cases such as serious road traffic accidents, overwhelming infections of sepsis, or, very occasionally, in cases of sudden unexpected death in infancy. Senior Nurse Bennion was looking after child B, a few feet from Lucy, in Nursery 1, although the room was quite full because there was a crossover between the day and the night shift, so there was no need for a crash call, because Dr. Harkness and Dr. Wood, who was a trainee, were already present. Dr. Ravi Jairam also came shortly after. Nurse Bennion said, "I remember Lucy asking for some assistance. When it became obvious there was a problem, I moved over to help with child A. She helped Lucy deliver some ventilator breaths over the neopuff via a face mask. As child had deteriorated, she took on the role of drawing up the emergency drugs that were needed to resuscitate him. She was still there when child A was declared dead. By then she had returned to care for his sister, child B." Nurse Bennion told the defence that there were times when nationally recommended staffing levels were achieved. She agreed that in a neonatal unit there was an awful lot to observe and monitor, and it was quite possible for a neonate who appeared well to suddenly deteriorate rapidly. With over 30 years' experience, she was asked by the prosecution whether the speed and nature of child A's deterioration was typical of her experience. She replied, "It was very rapid, very sudden, and sometimes there's an indication that you are going to have a deterioration. There was no evidence that he was going to deteriorate. However, it can happen and it has happened." Week 2, Day 10, Monday the 24th of October 2022. Dr. Ravi Jairam, a paediatrician at the Countess of Chester Hospital, told Manchester Crown Court that he was aware there was talk on the unit about a moving purple rash on the body of child B. Dr. Jairam said there were similar discussions following the death of child D on the 22nd of June. He said he couldn't explain the sequence of events that led to child A's death. It was very sudden and did not fit with any disease process that he'd have seen, learned or read about, adding, "It didn't make sense to me." He said that around the time of child A's inquest, he and a group of clinicians highlighted to hospital bosses the association they had seen with an individual being present in those situations and, how do I say diplomatically, being told we really should not really be saying such things, and not to make a fuss. Dr. Jairam went on to say he wishes he'd been more courageous, although he didn't have any evidence other than the association. Another nurse said when child B collapsed, she thought not again, and that child B looked very like child of the night before, pale, white, with this purple blotchy discoloration. It was all over her body. She said she couldn't remember who administered intravenous fluids to child before his collapse, but accepted she told police that another nursing colleague had pressed start in the process and Lucy assisted with checks. She said she'd acted as a mentor to Lucy and they became good friends. Lucy's defence asked her, "We know the allegations, but your experience when working with her was she was highly professional." She replied, "Yes." The defence continued and dedicated to the work she was doing. Again they agreed, yes. Day 11, Tuesday the 25th of October 2022. Expert Dr. Evans was approached by the National Crime Agency to review the case in 2017. After outlining why he'd been contacted and the obvious concerns, he said he'd concluded that air had somehow got into child A's circulation. He ruled out other conditions such as sepsis, a lack of fluids or hypoxia as causes or contributing factors to the collapse. An air embolism through an intravenous line was his only conclusion, and he was pretty adamant that it couldn't have been an accident. Lucy Letbys' defence asked Dr. Evans about his state of mind when approaching the case. They were basically accusing him of the confirmation bias that the defence eagerly taught the jury about in their opening. But Dr. Evans insisted he was tasked with investigating a clinical condition, not a crime. He said, "My state of mind was very clear. Let's find a diagnosis. Nothing to do with crime. Let's identify any specific collapse and see if I can explain it. There were occasions where I couldn't explain it, and occasions where I found something deeply suspicious. The name Lucy Letby meant nothing to me. I didn't know the staff. I was a blank sheet of paper. I had no idea and relied entirely on the evidence I could see from the clinical notes and applying my clinical experience and forming an opinion to the cause." He said he was asked to investigate 33 cases in total. The prosecution asked him, "How does an air embolism kill somebody?" Dr. Evans answered, "It interferes with the blood supply to the heart and lungs. It is the same mechanism as a clot. It blocks off blood supply and kills you. They then basically got him to reaffirm that he had no doubt that an air embolism in the ultravenous was the cause of death, and that it had to be intentional because the machines have fail-safes and alarms, as well as staff having it drilled into them not to let it happen. Another expert, Dr. Bowen, said it was extremely unlikely that air was administered accidentally. She said the amount of air likely to be fatal in an infant such as child A, who weighed just £3 5 ounce at birth, was a teaspoon of air.